Hi, this is the voice, Michael Chavello. You're listening to the Premium Oddscast, hosted by leading MMA odds maker Nick Kalikas, fight scientist and author of Fightnomics Reed Kuhn, and MMA journalist Brian Hemminger. The absolute best UFC betting info, hits, statistics, and analysis from the most respected authority in mixed martial arts betting, MMAOddsBreaker.com.
Welcome to the Premium Oddscast, presented by 5 Dimes. I'm Brian Hemminger, joined today by leading mixed martial arts odds maker Nick Kalikas to break down this Saturday's UFC 178 event, which takes place in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, if you're unfamiliar with our format, myself and Nick will be breaking down the fight card from top to bottom, providing extensive analysis and a pick for each fight after doing our film study for the event. Then, fight scientist and ESPN insider Reed Kuhn will step in and offer his expansive numerical insight on all bouts with sufficient data. Today, Reed will be able to contribute on 7 total bouts. Now, also pay attention to our MMA OddsBreaker staff picks article, which is usually released following the weigh-ins the day before the fight. So we will have our finalized picks there in case there are any changes made. Now, briefly looking back at our last event, our premium package bets for UFC Fight Night 52 went 2-0 to win 8.8 units overall. We won a 4-unit bet on underdog Kyung-Ho Kang, as well as a 3-unit bet on favorite Katsunori Kikuno. We also won a 2-unit free bet, which was a parlay of Kichi Kunamoto with Miesha Tate, for a total on the night of 10.8 units overall. Back to the present, UFC 178 features an 11-fight card in total and will be aired on pay-per-view as well as Fox Sports 1 and Fight Pass this Saturday night. Let's dive right in. Now, kicking off the preliminary card is a bantamweight contest between Manny Gamburyan, who is 16-10 overall, taking on Cody Gibson, who is 12-4. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
Gibson opens minus 140. The comeback on Gamburyan, even money. Since that time, the public has come in on Gibson. It's minus 190. The comeback is plus 150 now on Gamburyan. So some public support coming in early on Gibson. Of course, he's got that competitive battle with Aljamain Sterling that I think is kind of fresh in everybody's mind. And we all know how impressive Aljamain Sterling has been. I mean, a well-hyped, deserving prospect along the way. And Gibson, fought his butt off in that fight, and it was a very competitive matchup. So I think he's getting a lot of the credit and respect from that matchup more than anything else, even though he was impressive versus Johnny Bedford recently as well. So that's a good feather under his cap. But he's facing a tough guy in Gamburyan, and I think overall the public opinion out there, not the bettor's opinion, but the public opinion is probably going to be split on this fight. In fact, there's a lot of opinion out there that will support Gamburyan, and it is an interesting fight. Now, Gamburyan is making his weight cut to 135, so he's officially making his bantamweight debut here at this UFC, which is interesting, man, because Gamburyan, to me, I know he's short. He's only 5'5", so, I mean, as far as height goes, yeah, he could definitely fit into the bantamweight division, but he's a thick guy. He's a strong, powerful guy, so I don't know how he's going to be in bantamweight, to be honest with you. So that's one interesting aspect in my mind, and I think that it actually might hurt him. I know Gamburyan's getting a little bit older now. He's 33 years old. His chin overall has been a little bit suspect at times. I mean, he's been in there with some quality competition, and it's held up pretty well. So maybe that's not really fair to say, but he has been knocked out a couple times officially on his resume or whatever. He's got 2 KO losses, we should say. But that being said, I mean, Gamburyan's a pretty tough guy. He's got a lot of power. He's got a good underrated grappling game, submission game, wrestling game. So he's a handful. I mean, even on the feet, his boxing is good enough to that he can definitely do some damage. So Gamburyan's a well-rounded fighter. And again, at 135, it's going to be interesting to see if that power does come down and translate in this weight class. Because if it does, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with, especially if he hasn't really hit that decline spot that I'm a little bit fearful of. I mean, he's actually looked solid in his last couple of performances as well, Gamburyan has, so you got to give him a lot of credit for that. Now, Getting back to Gibson, though, I think Gibson does have some advantage in this fight. Of course, he's going to be 5'10" to 5'5" for Gamburyan, so he's going to have a pure height advantage. He's going to have a pure reach advantage to go along with that as well. Strength, of course, I think Gamburyan is going to be a little bit more powerful, but Gibson's not a weakling by any means. I mean, he's pretty solid, a strong guy in his own right. His wrestling is pretty solid to go along with it. I think his stand-up skill, he can mix things up. He moves relatively well on the feet, and he's got a little bit of power to go along with it. So I think this is going to be a barn burner. It's going to be a really competitive fight, but I do give the advantages in this fight to Gibson. I think he's a younger, fresher fighter, again, with his reach attributes, and I think the way he moves around, he's not going to be easy to kind of pin down and dictate the pace for Gamburyan. He's not going to be able to do that and bully Gibson around that much. So if that's the case, I think Gibson could probably outpoint Gamburyan.
And I'm going to slightly disagree here. I really think that Manny Gamburyan has a little bit more to offer, especially now that he's dropping down to the bantamweight division, where normally he'll be fighting guys closer to his own size, although this time around he's actually going to have a pretty sizable height and reach disadvantage. That hasn't really been a big problem for him in the past, though. He has pretty decent counter-striking. He lands some heavy hooks in his fights, and as long as he can lunge inside and throw those, he doesn't really need to worry about a reach disadvantage, especially against somebody like Cody Gibson that's not the most accomplished striker and doesn't really know how to use the jab and reach properly yet. He's still definitely developing that stage of his game. Now, in terms of everything else, there are a couple things to be concerned about. Gamburyan is 33 years old now, so he's approaching that danger zone. And he has been knocked out a couple times in the past, and your chin does not get better when you drop down a weight class. It usually gets slightly worse. So if he gets into a firefight with Gibson, I could see him getting knocked out potentially. But if he keeps it more technical, he could definitely be in a good spot here because Gibson is a little bit more of a brawler. And in my opinion, Gamburyan's hooks are pretty sharp, and when he does connect with them, they connect with power, and he does some damage. I mean, he rocked Nick Lentz a couple times in his last fight, which was very competitive, by the way. And that's a guy with a very sturdy chin. He withstood Chad Mendes. So I still feel like Gamburyan's power is going to translate when he drops down. It might even be a little more pronounced. So he's got that going for him. In terms of ground skills, Gibson is probably a slightly better wrestler compared to Gamburyan's judo skills for getting the fight to the canvas, but Gamburyan's takedown defense is pretty solid, and when he does get taken down, he usually works his way back to the feet. When Gamburyan's in top position, he's more of a controlling guy, where he's not doing a lot of damage, not going for a lot of submissions. So overall, I think the ground game is a bit of a wash. But I think that Gamburyan will probably be able to hold his own here. The strength of competition should play a big factor here. Gibson still clearly needs some work there in that department to get experience. And this might be a little bit too tough of a test here for the youngster. So I'm going to go with Manny Gamburyan here, and I think it'll be a good, close, entertaining scrap. Now, moving up to the lightweight division, we have another pair of prospects in John Tuck, who is 8-1 overall, taking on Kevin Lee, who is also 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Lee minus 190 to come back on Tuck plus 150, and right now over at 5dimes.eu, Lee is minus 180 to come back on Tuck plus 140. And by the way, I didn't mention it earlier, but all lines provided today on the podcast are courtesy of 5dimes.eu. And again, these lines are relatively fresh still, but there has been some early action that's come in. And again, it's dropped the line by 10 cents right now in this particular fight. So Lee is minus 180. I do think that Lee has some advantage in this fight. I know Tuck is a tremendous fighter. He's well-rounded in several aspects of the game. I mean, he's got some solid striking skills. He could be a very effective with some power on the feet as well. He's got a good ground game, especially his submission game is very impressive. I mean, he's very dangerous with the submission game. I mean, he can lock something up from top position, from bottom position, anyway on the ground. So he's definitely capable of finishing things standing up or on the ground. So that makes him a dangerous opponent. But I do think that Lee has some advantages coming into this fight. I think, for one, he's going to have a slight reach advantage. I know he's not going to be quite as tall as Tuck, but he's still going to have a pure reach advantage by a couple inches, which I think that possibly comes into play a little bit. But Lee's going to, more than anything else, he's going to want to close the distance here. He's got decent stand-up to go along with his more of a grappling-based fighter, but he's got okay stand-up skill to go along with that. But the best attribute for Lee is definitely closing the gap, and then kind of grinding people out, grinding his opponents out, mixing in takedowns to go along with his stand-up arsenal. So I think both these guys are very complete fighters. I think Tuck is a little bit more dangerous and more of a capable finisher, but Lee is a pretty good, solid grappler in his own right. So I think this is going to be an intriguing fight. I think Lee is going to look to maybe start things off by using his stand-up, and I think it'll be interesting back and forth. I think Lee can probably outpoint Tuck on the feet a little bit, but Tuck might be able to do a little bit more damage. So that, again, that's where the danger is going to come into play for Lee on the feet. I think that Lee is the side here. I think Lee's going to make some waves, make some noise as he goes on in his UFC career, and it starts with getting the victory here.
And again, I'm going to slightly disagree. I really feel like John Tuck has taken his game to another level since moving out to the MMA lab. Some of the things that were problems with him, detriments, are actually becoming strengths. The cardio was a huge concern heading into his last fight against Jake Lindsay, but he was the guy that actually had the better conditioning in that fight, and he ended up getting a solid finish. So you got to give him a little bit of credit where credit's due there. He's clearly working on his weaknesses. Now, in this fight, I do have a similar breakdown of how I see it playing out. I think that Tuck is going to be the more dangerous fighter. He has some really solid kicks and punches. He has good power. Lee is going to be a little bit quicker and a little bit more threatening with the takedown attempts, but I do feel like Tuck's takedown defense should hold steady, and he probably could win scrambles as well. Tuck has some very nice transitions on the ground, and he's clearly been working on that part of his game over at the lab. How I see this fight playing out, I can really see Tuck doing more damage on the feet, while Lee does a little bit more in terms of pace and output. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the judges end up scoring this one. And then on the ground, I actually think that Tuck would get the superior position if this fight goes to the ground, because he can stuff some takedowns and then wind up on top. So I'm going to end up siding with Tuck here. I've definitely been impressed with him lately, and that last fight really sealed the deal for me. Now, kicking off the Fox Sports 1 prelims is a welterweight contest between John Howard, who is 22-9, taking on Brian Ebersole, who is 50-16-1 with 1 no contest. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Howard minus 180, the comeback on Ebersole plus 140. Since that time, a little bit more action coming in on Howard. He's minus 210 now. The comeback is plus 160. And again, the lines are kind of early, so some fresh action coming in. So we'll see where the line ends up settling. But I think 2-1's probably going to be an accurate spot, and it'll hold steady around that. Interesting fight. I mean, Ebersole is a very talented fighter, well-rounded. He's been underrated for quite a bit. He had a nice run early on in his UFC career. But overall, I mean, the guy's had tons of fights. I mean, I think he's got 50 wins alone. So, that tells you the guy's been around for a long time. He's a savvy vet. And I think he's at basically the peak of his career, but there might be some signs of a decline. I mean, he hasn't been inactive the last couple of years, or he's been, I should say, a little inactive, the last couple of years. He's been out for almost a year again coming into this fight, since his loss to Story. And so there's a little bit of question marks around Ebersole. I mean, again, he's a talented guy. He's going to have some advantages in this fight. He's a southpaw. He's going to have some reach advantages to go along with it. And he's such a well-rounded fighter that regardless of where the fight takes place, he's always going to be game and he's always going to be dangerous. My problem with Ebersole, though, is, and especially in the last fight with Story, I mean, Story has a ton of power and he's the kind of guy that just pushes forward constantly and is in your face. But Ebersole is a little bit tentative in that spot. Howard, a little bit different than Story, but he's still that kind of fighter on the feet. He's got some power. He likes to, punch hard. He throws definitely with a lot of mean intent as well. So if Ebersole's a little tentative on the feet, I mean, Howard can definitely pick him apart, because I think Howard does obviously have some advantages, pure striking advantages on the feet. Now, even though Howard's a lot shorter, he's only going to have 1 inch of a reach disadvantage, so that comes into play a little bit as well. So now on the ground, I think it can go back and forth, but Howard has looked a little bit better recently on the ground as well. I mean, as far as, I know he got beat by LaFleur a little bit on the ground, but he still was pretty game against a very solid wrestling and grappling game of LaFleur. So that was kind of impressive. So really, I think these guys can kind of stifle each other as far as the wrestling and grappling exchanges go. We'll probably see it play out in the feet. Both of them are well-rounded. I guess I haven't gotten into Howard enough, but I mean, these guys are very similar in a lot of ways because they are so well-rounded. They've had a ton of fights under their belt, and they both keep on improving. They're probably peaking at the right time, minus, again, maybe a slight decline for Ebersole, as I just mentioned. Now, that being said, I do think it's Howard's fight to kind of win or lose because he does tend to be a little bit more active. I think he can push the pace. The striking's a little bit better. And if the ground does neutralize each other out, then I think definitely Howard has a little bit of an advantage in this fight. But Ebersole, you can't really count him out. I mean, he's definitely a talented fighter. He's been floating under the radar for a while, but it does bother me that he's going to have almost again a year layoff, and Howard's a little bit more of the fresher, slightly younger fighter that, I think even though both these guys are coming off a loss, I think Howard still has a little bit more momentum on his side as well. So my pick is going to be Howard, but it's a tough spot to bet.
And I'm in relative agreement. I do think that Howard has been the better mixed martial artist as of late. Brian Ebersole came into the UFC very hot. He won several fights in a row, beat some very tough opponents, including Chris Lytle. But he really hasn't done a lot for me lately. And the fact that he's been so inactive, I really fear that he's going to be very rusty. He's getting up there in age a little bit. And all those fights that he's had throughout his career potentially starting to add up, considering that he's taken some damage lately. He's been hurt a little more often in recent fights, and John Howard's power could seriously come into play here if this fight takes place on the feet. If it goes to the ground, if Ebersole is very dangerous from top position, he has some decent submission skills, he has very good ground and pound, but Howard holds his own there. He usually is the guy on top when the fight does go to the ground. He has pretty good wrestling, although Howard really isn't much of a threat when the fight goes to the ground. He's more of a positional control guy. On the feet, Ebersole, he's a little bit longer, a little rangier, a little taller, but I do think that Howard has more pure punching power. And the one thing Ebersole really has going for him is the diversity of his attack. I mean, this is a guy that knocked somebody out with a cartwheel kick before. He's tried it a couple times in the UFC. You know, he can definitely throw things that Howard might not be able to see coming, but I really don't think that Howard will have too much of a problem with him on the feet. He does a pretty good job of putting pressure on his opponents, forcing them into the defensive, and if he keeps this fight standing, I definitely see Howard pulling it out, and if it ends up going to the ground a lot, I think Howard's takedown defense will come into play, and Howard's top positional control will come into play more often than Ebersole's. So my pick's going to be John Howard as well. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, it's not a very compelling case in either way. You're right. Both guys have been well-rounded. They've pushed through fights on their feet. Both of them actually hang back a little bit. They tend to work at a slow pace. They don't really control the cage. But the one area that is a mismatch is in the power game. John Howard, punch for punch, has had more power, and Ebersole has had the worst chin. He's been knocked down twice in relatively short order. So there is a slight differential there. Who knows if, the southpaw effect will screw things up for John Howard, but it's kind of a wash there. Just neither one of them excelling in a big way in terms of either cage control, pace, or accuracy. There's just that slight power differential. On the mat, the share of ground control actually favors Ebersole. He has a very poor takedown offense, but he has actually gotten the better of just controlling time on the ground. And that's mainly because once he gets a takedown, he holds it for a very long time. Now, again, I think these guys are very similar in that respect. So with lines the way they are, first of all, just based on the data, this is definitely a no play for me. I just don't see a really compelling case either way. It is interesting to see that the over on this one, people have gotten wise to that. Both these guys have gone to a lot of decisions lately. They're tough. They don't really excel in flashy finishes, and therefore the over seems to be the obvious play. But then, of course, the lines do reflect that.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, sticking with the welterweight division, we have Patrick Cote, who is 21-8, taking on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who is 9-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
I opened Thompson minus 270, the comeback, and Cote plus 190. This line has had some movement. Thompson is now minus 400. The comeback on Cote is plus 280 now. So a little bit surprising because Cote typically gets some respect. And Thompson's still one of those guys that's a little bit unknown how much actual respect he's going to get because, of course, he came into the UFC with a ton of hype. Then, to be honest with you, overall, his last performance against Whittaker was brilliant. No, not taking anything away from that. But overall, I think he's been a disappointment to people. So hard to gauge the public hype on this fight, but it's definitely back on Thompson here. I think it is his fight to win or lose, though, to be honest with you. You basically have, I want to say almost, this is crazy because I'm going to call Cote a grappler, but you're going to have your striker versus a grappler matchup in a way. Now, Cote, of course, most of us, in most cases, we think of Cote as a striker in his own right, but in this matchup, He does not want to use his striking. He's going to get torched on the feet against a guy like Stephen Thompson. No doubt about that. I mean, Cote, his chin's starting to decline a little bit. I mean, he is 34 years old, but not just that. I mean, he's been in there with so many good fighters through the years that finally I think his chin's starting to let down a little bit. He's only been knocked out once in his career officially, but that being said, I mean, he has been rocked and he's managed to survive, in several fights, but against a guy with as much ability as Stephen Thompson on the feet, this is not a good scenario for Cote to try to mix things up and play out this fight on the feet with him. So Cote in his last fight against Noak, he ended up taking the fight to the ground. Surprisingly how easy actually he controlled the grappling aspect of that fight. I think he's going to have to repeat that kind of performance again against Thompson if he's going to have success. Thompson's takedown defense overall is pretty solid. It's going to continue to improve. I think he's going to expect that out of Cote, especially at this point of Cote's career. So I think he's going to be game. Now the line where it is now is getting a little tricky. I mean, -4-1. I do think Thompson probably finishes Cote along the way. It looks like out there with the way people are betting the total, a lot of people do not believe that's the case. They think it's probably going to hit the scorecards. If it does hit the scorecards, I think Cote has a legit shot to win because that means he's probably going to survive enough and maybe mix it up enough that he could steal a decision. But that being said, I still think it's Thompson's fight to win or lose. He can win on the scorecards, but I think along the way he probably catches that kind of suspect chin now of Cote and probably gets the job done. So my pick is going to be Thompson. Again, a little bit tricky as far as betting goes, but I think he is going to come through.
And I'm in complete agreement. The main thing here is on the feet, I think that Stephen Thompson is light years ahead of Patrick Cote. He just has a very good use of distance. His jab is spectacular. His kicks come from all sorts of different directions. If this fight stays standing, I think Patrick Cote is going to be in for a world of hurt. But it doesn't have to stay standing. As we saw in the most recent fight of Cote against Kyle Noak, Cote brought out some wrestling and was able to take Noak down repeatedly and keep him down, which was very surprising to me. So we have seen before where Stephen Thompson was controlled on the ground by Matt Brown, was taken down, beaten up quite a bit. So it is possible if Cote takes him down that he could win a decision. Do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. I think Stephen Thompson has been doing a lot of really good training with some high-level guys, and he should be able to stifle Cote's wrestling, which, in my opinion, is still relatively elementary. And on the feet, this fight is completely different because Cote's chin is definitely starting to deteriorate. It used to be one of his biggest strengths, but as you saw in the Alessio Sakara fight, he got hurt on the feet pretty bad. And obviously in the fight against Noak, he was actually getting lit up a bit on the feet as well. So, and in Stephen Thompson, this is a guy that is incredibly accurate and is able to hit you with those shots that you don't see coming. And those are the ones that usually knock people out. They don't have a chance to brace themselves. And Stephen Thompson is able to throw those types of strikes. He can knock you out with kicks or punches, as you saw in his last fight against Robert Whittaker. So, all in all, I do think that while Cote is a game opponent, the wear and tear he's taken and the deterioration of his chin is going to come into play. And if he does not take this fight to the ground for all 3 rounds, then I see Thompson knocking him out on the feet at some point. So my pick is Stephen Thompson. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they're in agreement, and this is an instance where the numbers actually tell a very clear story. Stephen Thompson has a clean sweep of all striking and stand-up metrics that I have on the Uber tail of the tape. He is more powerful, more accurate, higher paced, better defense. He's also younger, which helps, cause both these guys officially have a pretty good chin, but I think we can agree that Cote is more at risk. That's a very compelling story that says Stephen Thompson standing up is going to be the far more dangerous striker and owning those exchanges. Specifically, Patrick Cote has below average strike defense. Or not willing, but he does take a lot of punches to the head. And Stephen Thompson is very accurate and very powerful. So that's a bad combination. So the big question you guys have already said, can Cote get it down? I'll throw this stat out. He only has 23% takedown accuracy. Remember, the UFC average is close to 40% for that. So he is below average in that. He's more likely to attempt a takedown than Stephen Thompson, clearly, but his success rate hasn't been all that good. Stephen Thompson's takedown defense is slightly better than average, actually. So he too is used to knowing that guys want him on his back to neutralize that threat, and he's good at defending it. And he learned the hard way what happens when he doesn't defend it against Matt Brown. And I think that has been a key area of where he's been focusing defensively, how to improve his game, to fill that hole, and to make sure that people can't just wrestle him and neutralize his striking threat. So the numbers are pretty compelling on this one that, Stephen Thompson hopefully will keep it standing and actually play to his strength and therefore be able to play his game and outstrike Patrick Cote.
All right. Thanks, Reed. Now dropping down to the lightweight division, we have Jorge Masvidal, who is 27-8, taking on James Krause, who is 21-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Masvidal minus 405, the comeback on Krause plus 285. Interesting matchup. I mean, you got to respect Krause and what he's capable of doing here. But I should mention, of course, right away first, the line did drop. Masvidal dropped a little bit below 400, and now he's actually climbed back up to 400. So as far as action goes early on, the sports books are getting two-way action on this fight. So 4-1 seems to be a fair line. We'll see as it get closer to fight day if I think Masvidal might climb up a little bit more with all the parlay action I'm expecting on Masvidal as well, but we'll see how it goes. But again, going back to Krause is a very talented fighter. He's definitely got momentum on his side, some confidence on his side. He's performed relatively well in the UFC thus far. And again, he's one of these guys that's been around for a little while, and he's still relatively young. He's only 28 years old. So Krause has a lot of things going for him. You could tell he's putting the time into the gym, and he's just improving his overall game. On the feet, he's long, he's lanky, he's got some power to go along with it, so his striking is actually pretty good. On the ground, his takedown defense is probably his biggest weakness, but it is getting a little bit better. But once you get Krause on his back, he's very dangerous there as well. He always will search for the triangle armbar. He's always throwing up his legs and looking for something. So he's pretty active on the ground. He can even hit you with some elbows and has some decent ground and pound from his back as well. So Krause, not the easiest guy to deal with on the ground. But that being said, I mean, he's matched up with just a better fighter. I mean, that's why I opened Masvidal this high. Obviously kind of try to keep people off him because I do think he's going to win the fight. Masvidal, in my opinion, is a little bit more well-rounded even than Krause. Masvidal has a tremendous amount of stand-up skill. He's got more power, especially with his hands on the feet as well. Again, as far as pure reach advantage goes, Masvidal doesn't really lack that much in the reach department either. I think Krause is only going to have him by 2 inches, so I don't think that's going to make a big difference in this fight. But Masvidal, what impresses me the most about him, I mean, this guy, talk about improving his game and being around a while. He's a savvy vet as well. He's had a lot of fights throughout his career against solid competition, and the guy, to me, is really peaking in his career, and he's becoming a legit title contender. Masvidal has the capabilities to take the fight to the floor when he wants to. His wrestling severely underrated, and he's shown that. I mean, he's definitely, I think at least in this time, it might not be as underrated as it was before because people are starting to respect the fact that he's such a well-rounded fighter. But again, he's capable of taking the fight to the floor, controlling his opponents. His fight IQ is really smart. Once he does get the fight to the floor, he's dangerous with his sub game. He's got nasty ground and pound, that killer instinct that you like to see in fighters. But he doesn't have to take the fight to the ground. I mean, he's capable of standing up with people and more times than not, beating the people on the feet as well. So Masvidal is the type of fighter that regardless of where the fight takes place, he can beat you. And I think that that's the case here against Krause. I think Krause is going to have kind of, I hate to say it, but your puncher's chance to beat Masvidal. Now, Masvidal has been rocked quite a few times throughout his career. He's actually been knocked out once as well, but it seems like he's the type of fighter that his defense at times on the feet is a little sloppy and he gets tagged and he gets rocked. But he does recover fairly quickly, and then he seems to kind of wake up and get more serious and tightens up his defense along the way after the fact. So there is a little bit of concern in that aspect. I mean, Krause is definitely a talented enough fighter. You never know, he could land something, but again, I think it's going to have to be more of that puncher's chance for Krause to win this fight. If not, if he doesn't get Masvidal out of there, Masvidal can definitely win the decision here. I think Masvidal could possibly even finish inside. So Masvidal has more ways to win this fight. He's simply the better fighter in almost every area across the board here. That's why you're seeing him as a high favorite, and I believe that he deserves to be a high favorite. So my pick comfortably is going to be Masvidal here.
And I'm in complete agreement. I really think that this is absolutely Jorge Masvidal's fight to lose. You look at it, at least stylistically, I think while Krause is a little bit longer, all the regular metrics will go to Masvidal. Masvidal is just a little bit more technical with his boxing and his defense. He's harder to hit, in my opinion, and I think he's much better in terms of the pressure he puts on his opponents, the counter-striking ability that he can do, as well as the punching power. He actually does have some pretty solid punching power, even though he doesn't always throw everything with super bad intentions. Now, on the ground, I think Masvidal has better wrestling, and while he's not a huge offensive submission threat, his top control is solid and his ground and pound is excellent. The biggest thing for Krause here is he can score some flashy kicks or some big punches that could catch Masvidal. Masvidal has been dropped in the past, although while his chin isn't amazing, Masvidal's recovery is excellent. You saw in his last fight against Crookshank just flattened him in the first round, and Masvidal immediately got up and then actually came back and, in my opinion, won the round. So this is a guy that is very tough to keep down. So I really feel like as long as Masvidal stays within himself here, doesn't do anything too stupid and leave a huge opening for Krause to take advantage of, then it's going to be very difficult for Krause to really get anything going. Krause has had a little bit of trouble in several fights, actually. You know, Bobby Green was able to outwork him with a big combination of punches and kicks. And even in his most recent fight against Jamie Varner actually broke his ankle very early in the fight and arguably won the first round before the doctor stopped it. So I think, you know, if a one-footed Jamie Varner can beat James Krause in the first round, then a much better Jorge Masvidal, in my opinion, should be able to not only win but dominate. So my pick is going to be Jorge Masvidal. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
They are in agreement. I won't go too over the top with this, but keep in mind the grappling game is a clean sweep for Masvidal. Not only is he very good at landing takedowns, he has also very good takedown defense. And the takedown defense of James Krause is terrible. He's literally only defended successfully one takedown attempt in his UFC career. So if Masvidal wants top control, he can have it. He's going to be dictating the grappling game. Now, standing up, a little bit more mixed. Masvidal is the more accurate striker. He also has some knockdowns to his credit, and he has the better chin, at least punch for punch. So, there's some edges. Krause has fought at a very high pace and has decent accuracy. He just hasn't knocked anybody down, and he's been dropped twice himself. So, I think overall the efficiency leans Masvidal. And then once you throw in the grappling stats, Masvidal knows how to control people on the mat, and I think that will be a big help to him for winning the rounds.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the bantamweight division, we have the final bout of the preliminary card, and it features former champion Dominick Cruz, who is 19-1, taking on former title challenger Takeya Mizugaki, who is 27-2 overall. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, open Cruz minus 350, the comeback on Mizugaki plus 250, and I should say that this line has been out for a while now, so it definitely has had time to settle and see where the real action is. And right now, Cruz is minus 400, the comeback on Mizugaki's plus 325, so a little bit more overall support coming in on Cruz. And again, the books are kind of moving accordingly to try to keep people off Cruz as well here. But this is the type of fight that you definitely want to draw two-way action if you're a sports book, because, I mean, there's a lot of weird circumstances in this fight. And one being, obviously, this is Cruz's first fight back in a long time. I mean, the guy's been out with injuries, as we all know, with surgeries. And that, for me, comes into play here. I just don't know what kind of version we're going to see of Dominick Cruz. I mean, typically, this is another fight we were just talking about, how Masvidal has clear advantages over Krause. I think that's the same thing here with Cruz. I mean, of course, Mizugaki is a very talented fighter. The guy is actually, talk about peaking into their career. I think Mizugaki, this is the best he's ever been. I mean, the guy is a tremendous striker on the feet. He's got underrated wrestling. Of course, he doesn't use his submission game that much, but he's capable on the ground as well. So Mizugaki, a very well-rounded, talented fighter. He's on a real roll here recently too. He's got some impressive wins on his resume, and the guy keeps on improving. So he's going to be at an all-time high with his confidence as well. But that being said, mental aspect of the game for Cruz, he seems like he's a pretty strong, mentally prepared fighter overall. I mean, just looking at his analysis, from the UFC, Fox Sports 1 or Fox Sports 2, breakdown shows. I mean, the guy is definitely intelligent. You could tell, he's so smooth with his the way he goes about breaking down fights. So I think that's going to actually translate into his own game plan and methodical thinking for the Mizugaki fight. So mentally, I think Cruz is going to be prepared, but he has to question himself a little bit. Can he perform? I mean, I know I've heard in practice at least he's looked great, but practice and actually going and doing this thing 100% in the octagon against a top tier contender like Mizugaki is a different story. So I think mentally there might be some questions with Cruz. And then physically, like I said, the injuries are definitely a concern. But other than that, I think Cruz has the advantage on the feet. He moves well. He's going to be a little bit tricky for Mizugaki to basically pin down and have striking success against. And Cruz is more of a sniper. I mean, he's going to be able to move and then counter punch well. And his offense, I mean, with his hands is tremendous, really. And again, he mixes things up pretty well overall. So I think that Cruz can get the takedowns if needed. He's got better wrestling. He's got good takedown defense, of course, to go along with it. His submission game is, again, kind of like Mizugaki's, where he doesn't use it too often, but it's there if he needs it. But he's more of a point type of fighter that's worked extremely well. I mean, obviously he's a former bantamweight champion for a reason. He didn't get beat. He just unfortunately got his title stripped because of all the time off. So, hard fight for Cruz to step back into. Is not going to be a gimme by any means, but it should be his fight to win or lose because, again, on the feet, on the ground, overall, he's the better fighter. So I think it should be a tough fight for Mizugaki. But as far as betting goes, it's another tough spot because I don't think, I mean, especially 4-1, I don't think it's a very smart move to just be going crazy and adding Cruz into parlays because we don't know what we're going to get until we see him play out in the octagon here. So I'm going to pick Cruz. I think obviously should be the right side in most cases, but there are some question marks for sure surrounding this fight for me.
Yeah, the question marks obviously are, how is Cruz going to look? Because before all the injuries, he was one of the most consistent fighters in the UFC roster. He would go out there and he would push a high pace, he would move around a ton, he would throw with a high volume, and he would frustrate his opponents, and he would win a decision. Dominick Cruz by decision was one of the easiest bets in MMA. But who knows what's going to happen here? For a guy that was so reliant on his wonky footwork and constant movement and his conditioning, how is Dominick Cruz going to look after repeated serious knee injuries and being out for over 2.5 years? This is a guy that, was so dangerous in the bantamweight division, and I'm not quite convinced that he's going to come back and look like the Dominick Cruz of old. This is a huge layoff and so many question marks for what's going to happen here, especially because he's going in there against somebody in Takeya Mizugaki who is fighting better than he's ever fought in his entire career. Mitsugaki's stand-up has looked better than ever. His ground game has looked sharp. He's been a very dangerous fighter. And if Dominick Cruz comes in here and does not fight up to the Dominick Cruz of old standards, he could definitely get upset. Mizugaki has some power, although he's not a huge finisher. He does have some good power and a high volume as well. And if Dominick Cruz is not able to move around and sidestep and hop and do all the crazy things that he used to be able to do, he's going to be a sitting duck for what Mizugaki brings. And if Dominick Cruz takes too long to settle in because he's rusty, Mizugaki could take advantage early. So tons of question marks for Dominick Cruz here. I really just am going to completely stay away and pass on this one in terms of betting, just because you just don't know. I gotta see how he looks more than anything else. Obviously, I don't think he would return if he didn't think he could go out there and still perform like he before, but way too many question marks for me. I mean, I'm going to pick Cruz, but that's only mainly relying on how he used to fight, because the old Dominick Cruz would definitely have won a decision against Takeya Mizugaki. So I'm going based off of the way that Dominick Cruz used to fight by picking this one, but just with how long he's been out and then especially the multiple leg injuries, you got to stay away in terms of betting. But Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Yeah, this one is tricky. I mean, a long layoff does tend to impact people. Generally speaking, people who have been out longer than a year perform a little bit below average, or they lose more often than baseline. So that is a concern. In this particular matchup, these two guys actually look very similar on paper. They're high volume but low accuracy strikers. And then on the ground, they've both been pretty successful. But several important metrics do lean towards Dominick Cruz. he has been outworking his opponents to a higher degree. He also has had much greater defense, or much better defense, so he is extremely hard to hit. And I think we all know that just because of the weirdness of his combinations. He comes in from different angles and tends to go in and out. That's hard to deal with for a lot of guys until you get used to it. Sometimes, we see Uriah Faber maybe start to figure it out towards the end of a 5-round fight. 3 rounds is a lot less time to figure it out, and you haven't seen him in a long time, so who knows what he's going to throw. So overall, Dominick Cruz has just been a little bit more effective. His total effectiveness score is plus 1.4 a minute compared to 0.02. So there's a big difference there. And on the mat, Dominick Cruz, his ground control stat is 96%, which is pretty ridiculous. He has great takedown defense, good takedown offense as well. So although Mizugaki does have strong stats, Dominick Cruz just is a little bit better, at least historically. But again, these unknowns being out of the game so long, you would expect a high-level guy like Dominick Cruz to come back and not miss a beat, but it's hard to say. I think they definitely benefited him by giving him this matchup rather than throwing him in against a title or a champion or in a title elimination bout. But he's such a big favorite here, and there's a few unknowns. It's probably best to pass on this one, and you're not getting a whole lot of value anyway.
Now, kicking off the pay-per-view main card, we have number 1 contender Kat Zingano in a women's bantamweight contest, who is 8-0 overall, taking on Amanda Nunes, who is 9-3. Now, Nick, what's the MMA oddsmaker's perspective on this one?
Zingano opens minus 280. The comeback on Nunes plus 200. And again, another spot where the lines actually stayed relatively steady. It's minus 275 right now for Zingano. The comeback on Nunes is plus 235. Stylistically, this should be a good matchup for Zingano. I mean, she's the type of girl that is well-rounded in all aspects of the game, but there's some question marks for sure surrounding Zingano, and I'll get into that a little bit more here. But I mean, her background is obviously, I think what she excels at the most is her grappling, her wrestling, her takedowns, her control, her submissions, that sort of game. And Nunes, that's obviously her weakness in most cases, is getting taken down to the floor, getting controlled, possibly getting submitted. It seems to be her kryptonite along the way. Now, of course, Nunes has definitely improved those aspects of her game. I mean, she's actually using wrestling more offensively these days, and I mean, obviously it's paid off for her, the hard work she's putting in. But make no mistake, Nunes is more of the striker, and Zingano is more of the grappler here in this particular fight. Even though both of them are pretty well-rounded, Nunes is going to want to keep this fight standing. And if she keeps it standing, I think Nunes is actually going to have a significant edge on the feet. She's going to be able to land more of a versed attack, more of solid combinations, and I think she's a more powerful striker as well. Now, Zingano, of course, in the clinch is pretty strong. She throws some nasty knees, as evident in a few of her fights. And she mixes things up. She dirty boxes well, and she's a tough girl, no doubt about it. But I think still Nunes standing, and all aspects of the game, even in a clinch game, everything should favor Nunes a little bit. But again, Nunes' weakness is definitely the ground, and that's where Zingano seems to excel a little bit more. So Zingano's game plan is definitely going to be to take this fight to the floor, try to get top position, land some ground and pound, and basically just bully Nunes around a little bit and try to get the decision out, or even possibly end this fight by submission. Chances are she's going to be able to do most of that along the way, but I mean, with her time off, she's had a very long layoff. She's had, obviously, the injuries. She's had her husband's death to deal with. She's had a lot of things that are kind of getting in her way, in my opinion, and it just puts a few question marks around her right now. So for me, I can't have much stock in her, especially as far as a bet. I know a lot of people are going to be parlaying Zingano here. I would recommend against that. I mean, it's a kind of a spot to see where she's at. She's been out for so long, and she's had so many personal things to deal with that it's not necessarily smart to bet this fight. I think it's a dog or pass situation. And I think it is a possibility that she gets upset here by Nunes. I know that that's not what the UFC wants. Obviously, they're pushing Zingano towards a Ronda Rousey title shot. And in all likeliness, if Zingano is at least up to par to where she was before her layoff or whatever, or she's close to it, she should get the job done here. So I'm going to pick Zingano. It's not a very confident pick, again, because of all the little things that I just mentioned with their time off and the personal situations. But, I mean, stylistically, Zingano should be able to control this fight and get the W here. But again, I would be a little bit scared or hesitant a little bit to lay that kind of price on Zingano right now. So that's my pick, though, Zingano to win the fight.
And I'm in relative agreement. The main thing here is in terms of actual ability. You gotta side with Kat Zingano. She is clearly the better grappler, the better wrestler of the two, and I think she's also more dangerous in the clinch, where, she lands those brutal knees that helped her finish the Miesha Tate fight. Also has some pretty good elbows. Now, in distance, Zingano does still need to have a little bit of work to do. I think that Nunes probably is the better pure boxer of the two. She has some good power on the feet. She's definitely a dangerous fighter, but from people that have watched her 2 UFC fights, they might think that Nunes is actually really good on the ground. But honestly, she faced 2 of the worst ground fighters in the entire UFC roster in Randami and Gaff. So you have to say that I think her ground game is clearly overrated, and in this fight it's going to show. Zingano is almost certainly going to take Nunes down at some point, and I think it's going to be some big trouble for Nunes. She's at least going to be able to control her, if not land some brutal ground and pound. She lands very good elbows. She's very good at using all of her appendages to do the most damage possible to opponents. And I really think that Zingano is capable of unleashing some serious violence here. Now, one thing to watch out for, obviously, is the time off. How is Kat Zingano going to respond to a serious knee injury that has kept her away from the cage after earning that number 1 contender spot? That's going to be a huge question mark. Will she still have that same explosiveness? Will she still have the wrestling to fall back on if things aren't going well on the feet? And obviously the personal situation with her husband dying, that you have to factor stuff like that in. This fight game is very mental. So that is a huge concern, and that's the main reason that this fight is probably going to be a pass. Even though I think that Zingano clearly has plenty of methods to pull this fight out, you're just not quite sure where her head is right now. We'll find out on fight night, but my pick, at least for now, is Kat Zingano.
Now moving up to the middleweight division, we have Tim Kennedy, who is 18-4 overall, taking on Yoel Romero, who is 8-1. Now, Nick, what's the MMA odds maker's perspective on this one?
Well, I opened Kennedy minus 130, the comeback on Romero minus 110. Now, again, this is another line that has been up for a while, so the action has settled quite a bit, and the action says Romero is now the favorite, minus 145. Comeback is plus 125 on Kennedy. So more support coming in on Romero overall. It's been kind of steady. And I think that we're going to continue to see that trend a little bit. I don't know if the line's going to escalate too much past where it is now. I think, again, it's settled and it's probably going to stay ballpark. Might even see some action back in on Kennedy before the fight actually goes. So we could see it drop back down to a pick'em. It's a tricky fight. I mean, Romero has looked great, especially recently. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The guy is a very talented fighter. I mean, to me, at age 37, I'm kind of expecting Romero to have that decline spot, to end up just showing that he is a 37-year-old and maybe his cardio going and his chin getting that much more suspect, because those are two areas. I mean, his cardio and chin in the past, to me, have been a little bit suspect. He's only been knocked out once, and of course that was the phase out back in the day, but since that time he's looked great. And I think fight by fight the guy actually improves, which is crazy to say, because I mean, he's fought decent competition overall, and I think his cardio is getting a little bit better. His chin is held up a little bit better as well, and training with American Top Team has definitely helped his overall confidence, his game, across the board. You could tell he's putting in the work again. So Romero, I think, again, is another one of these fighters that's kind of peaking in their career, even though he's 37 years old. But that being said, I mean, he does have some advantages in this fight. He's a southpaw, which is going to be a little bit tricky for Kennedy to deal with possibly. He's going to have height, a little bit of height advantage, but a pure reach, I think Kennedy's got him by an inch, so that's interesting to say the least as well. But flipping over to Kennedy real quick, I mean, you know what you're getting in Kennedy. Kennedy has been a savvy vet for a long time, and again, talk about peaking in their career. I don't think there's been a better version that we've seen recently with Tim Kennedy. I mean, his performance against Michael Bisping last time out was more than impressive. A lot of people were really kind of counting him out in that spot because Bisping's a tough guy to control, and they figured that Kennedy would probably get outstruck by Bisping, at least outpointed on the feet. But Kennedy was able to out-grapple Bisping, get him down, control him. That's how he ended up winning the fight. Of course, even on the feet, Kennedy was landing some powerful punches along the way, which made an impact on the fight. So Kennedy, I think, again, he's basically the best version that he's been. And as far as grappling goes, of course, that's interesting because Romero has that Olympic wrestling background, but Kennedy actually might be the more capable grappler in the cage. I mean, he's underrated a little bit when it comes to wrestling and it comes to grappling. I mean, if you look at Sonnen, all of us know that Sonnen's probably one of the best wrestlers that's ever stepped in the cage. I mean, his credentials speak for themselves, and what he's been able to do to his opponents in the cage speaks for itself, really, his work. But Kennedy was able to control Michael Bisping a little bit easier than Sonnen was. So that tells me a lot. And Bisping continues to improve that takedown defense. So it's not exactly an easier task to get Bisping down at this point. So you got to tip your hat to Kennedy because he was able to do what a lot of people didn't expect, at least that easy. So Kennedy is going to be a tough out for Romero. I think on the feet you got to give some advantages to Romero because I think he's a little bit more unorthodox. He's got that power to go along with it. He's a more dangerous striker, so he might do some damage on the feet. I mean, Romero's performance against Alvarez is more than impressive for sure. But Kennedy's a different beast, and I think Kennedy, even on the feet, he's got enough power to make things interesting. But I think he's going to come up with a smart game plan. He's going to be able to mix things up. He's probably going to be able to take Romero down. Now, I think he probably can control some of the action on the ground, meaning get him down, hold him down, get in a dominant position, maybe even possibly test Romero's sub-defense a little bit and, find his way along that line. But overall, I think Kennedy's smart enough that he could pull this fight out. It is only a 3-round fight, so Kennedy should be the fresher fighter as the fight goes on a little bit. And I think Kennedy's fight IQ is a little bit smarter. He's been in there with better fighters from top to bottom overall. So I think it's kind of his fight to win or lose, but it is going to be an ultra competitive battle. That's why you're seeing the line close to a pick'em fight. But I think I'm going to go on a limb here and pick the dog. I mean, Kennedy, I opened him up as a slight favorite, but I believe, with the public coming in on Romero, they're kind of wrong here. I think they're miscounting in Kennedy's talent and where he is at this stage in his career. So I'm going to go with Kennedy as a pick, and I think there possibly could be some value of Kennedy as a bet as well.
And I'm in complete agreement. I really think that Tim Kennedy is in a really good spot right now in his career, especially coming off of that Michael Bisping victory. And Yoel Romero might be getting a little overrated based on the win over Brad Tavares, who, as we saw recently in the Tim Boetsch fight, maybe was put a little bit too far up on the pedestal. Now, Kennedy, in my opinion, might actually have a better ground game than Romero, even though Romero was an Olympic silver medalist in wrestling. Just having those credentials doesn't always translate, and we have seen Romero taken down in the cage by the likes of Derek Brunson and Ronnie Marcus, who's not even in the UFC anymore. So I do think that Romero is getting a little bit overrated here based on his most recent performance, which was a very solid showing against Tavares. Now, Kennedy, in terms of stand-up skill, he isn't the most dynamic striker. He has decent kicks and overall relatively good technical boxing. Romero is more of a flashy, explosive power guy. So he's going to come in, he can throw those flying knees, he has very big power in both hands, so he's very dangerous if he connects. But Kennedy really hasn't ever been hurt in a fight from my recollection, and Romero, on the other hand, has. So if these guys are trading blow for blow, then it's, my opinion, it's going to be Kennedy that could get the better of it. And if they go to the ground, I think Kennedy could actually get the better of it. And the biggest thing here is conditioning. While Romero did look pretty good in his last fight, if Kennedy pushes a really high pace, his cardio is excellent, and he could actually get the better of Romero late in this fight as well if he starts to tire. So honestly, the only real advantages that I see for Romero are pure power and explosiveness, and maybe he might have the stronger double leg of the two, obviously, because of his background. But in terms of actual grappling, Kennedy is a bigger submission threat. The conditioning's with him, and I think chin strength is definitely with Tim Kennedy as well. So it sounds crazy, even though Romero is the betting favorite, but I'm going to pick Tim Kennedy as well. So, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, full disclosure, I am a little biased in this one. I know Tim pretty well. I've worked with his team, and he has gotten scouting reports for pretty much every matchup he's had lately. And while with Michael Bisping was a more known commodity, he was a more known opponent. We understood his game, and we also understood how to beat him. And despite Tim being more than a 2-1 underdog, I think we were very confident that he was going to win that. So this one, there's some more unknowns. Yoel Romero you're right. He just has not brought his wrestling into the cage the way you would have expected from what we've seen from other guys who were Olympic wrestlers who clearly use it when they get into MMA. When it comes to MMA wrestling, Tim Kennedy has the better stats. So your hypothesis is correct here. Kennedy advances position more frequently. He has better takedown defense. He has better takedown offense, and overall has simply controlled people on the ground a lot more than Yoel Romero. And that's against, I believe, Kennedy facing stiffer competition. He also has submission attempts. So you look at the clean sweep on the mat, and the striking differences start to be less important. I think Romero, you're right, he does have more power. His knockdown rate is higher. That's not to say that Kennedy isn't capable of knocking people out. I don't think he's always going for that though. Similar to Chael Sonnen, he may be using more of his strikes to set up his ground game, to keep people busy, to keep people guessing. He can make you pay if you focus too much on the takedown, and we saw that against Bisping. He hit him up on the jaw a few times. I was actually pretty impressed that Bisping was still standing after a few of those. But he is taking a risk facing Romero. Romero is big. He is powerful. He is slightly longer, not much, but he also is a southpaw. So I don't know if Kennedy wants to test that game trading leather. That's probably not going to favor him. More of the metrics favor Romero in the stand-up game, but they favor Kennedy on the mat, which again, it's not something I expected to see with Romero having Olympic credentials, but that's the case. So, again, I am biased, but I do see a clear path to victory for Tim Kennedy. I think he gets it to the ground, and once there, he's got strikes, he's got submissions. I think he is capable of finishing it on the mat.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Reed. Now, dropping down to the featherweight division, we have one of the most anticipated bouts in Dustin Poirier, who is 16-3, taking on Conor McGregor, who is 15-2 overall. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
McGregor opens minus 170. Poirier opens plus 130. Now, looking at the line again, this line has been out for quite a while. It's McGregor minus 265. Poirier is plus 225. And a little disclosure out there, there was a spot that actually opened Poirier as a 2-1 favorite. So that was a little bit of surprise. But again, the official line over at 5dimes.eu was minus 170 for McGregor. The comeback on Poirier plus 130. So a lot of movement and support coming in on McGregor. And you know what? I can see it. Poirier is definitely a very talented fighter. In fact, he's a more well-rounded fighter. He's a tremendous talent, and you've seen, again, we're talking about the improvement level of people and, peaking in certain spots of their career. And Poirier might be doing that as well. The guy has fought top level competition recently. His fight with Cub Swanson, which a lot of people believe Cub Swanson should be the rightful guy next in line to get the shot at 145 as far as title goes. That was a coin flip type of fight. Cub Swanson barely came away with the win in that fight. It could have went realistically either way, in a lot of people's opinions. So that's how close Poirier is to that title shot. He's been there before. He's climbed up the ladder and he made it back. And the guy has fought again, solid competition. His best attributes, I think, he's got tremendous striking on the feet, but it's his ground game and submission game, especially in this matchup over McGregor. I think McGregor is going to look to keep the fight standing, and on the feet, he should have a slight edge. I think both these guys are southpaws, so it's going to make it interesting. And both these guys actually have the same exact reach too, so there's not advantages there. But I think McGregor has the power advantage, and McGregor has a better chin of the two as well. I know Poirier hasn't been officially knocked out, but he has been rocked in several fights along the way. And I think McGregor, with the kind of power this guy has, he could definitely put Poirier out and finish the job and become the first person to really knock out Poirier. If not, it's going to be interesting. And I think on the feet, it is going to be a firefight. It can go back and forth. And don't make a mistake. I'm not counting Poirier's stand-up game out completely. I think there is a chance that he could pick apart McGregor a little bit on the feet and maybe land enough shots to get him out of there as well. But I think you have to look at it as realistic as possible. And from what I've seen recently, especially from McGregor, he should have the advantage of standing. His takedown defense should be good enough to be able to keep this fight standing. So he should basically win the fight because of his stand-up game overall. But if he makes a mistake, the fight hits the floor. Poirier by far has the advantages on the ground again. It's pure submission game. Wrestling's going to be pretty close though. McGregor has underrated wrestling, to be honest with you. I've been nothing but impressed with his offensive wrestling, but this is not a spot where he really wants to test the waters on the ground too much with Poirier. Again, I think it's his fight to win or lose if he keeps it standing, and I think it probably is a difficult matchup for Poirier, so I'm going to pick McGregor to win this fight, and probably I mean, a very game and tough Poirier, but he probably can win it by finish. So I'm going to pick McGregor to win this fight.
And I'm in agreement. I really think that one of the things that makes McGregor so special and so fun to watch is how unpredictable he is. He stays very coiled up and ready to pounce at a moment's notice on the feet, and he can hurt you just about anywhere. He has really nasty uppercuts, his straight punches are rock solid, and then his kicks are extremely dangerous. As you saw in the last fight against Diego Brandao, he actually set up the finish by landing a really crazy spinning kick that stunned Brandao, that set up the TKO finish from punches. And he's able to throw a multitude of kicks, from side kicks and front kicks and regular leg kicks and head kicks and spinning kicks. So the fact that he can throw all of these types of strikes with very little setup is extremely impressive for me. And it really makes him unpredictable and very dangerous, especially against Poirier, a guy that, while his stand-up is definitely improving and he's showcased some really solid moments on the feet, he does have liabilities there in terms of his defense. Poirier has been hurt in multiple UFC fights, from Jonathan Brookins to his most recent fight against Akira Corassani, and then of course the Korean Zombie fight, he got rocked in there before the finish got set up from submission. So you do have to watch out for that. So while Poirier hasn't been knocked down per se, he definitely has been in trouble in terms of his defense. And that does make this fight exceptionally scary if it stays standing. Now, I'm not going to completely count out Poirier on the feet. McGregor does like to keep his hands low, and he has been clipped a couple times. He hasn't been hurt, but he hasn't really been facing the type of guys that will do serious damage to him on the feet yet. And if Poirier lands that big right hand of his, he has a very good counter hooks, then I do think McGregor could get himself in trouble if he's a little too overconfident in there. Now, on the ground, McGregor and Poirier both have pretty solid wrestling, but Poirier's submission game is significantly better than McGregor's. That's pretty much been McGregor's Achilles heel in the past, was getting taken down or going to the ground and then getting tapped out. So Poirier could definitely pull something off there if this fight goes to the canvas. But in my opinion, this fight's probably going to stay standing. McGregor has very good takedown defense, and if he keeps it upright, at some point he's going to clip Poirier and probably put him out. So my pick is going to be Conor McGregor. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Yeah, this is the people's main event for a reason. Both these guys have very fast stand-up pace. And so you put that together, you also put together the fact that they like to control the cage. They like to outwork their opponents. This is a barn burner in the making. Those two ingredients are the keys to a barn burner. Now they also happen to be very accurate, but the key differentials on the stand-up game are that Conor McGregor is more powerful punch for punch. He has better strike avoidance, and I think he also has the better chin. So in terms of once the leather starts flying, I'm not sure how long it would last if these two guys really go full tilt on their feet. They're both southpaws, so they're both going to be a little bit off. It's a cyclone matchup, what I call in the book, when there's the counterclockwise, or the clockwise spin. So I think McGregor really does have those advantages on the feet. But I agree with you, Poirier is very dangerous with submissions. He has slick transitions, and he is going to want to get it down. So the key stat in that case, what's his takedown accuracy? It's only 31%. It's below average, whereas Conor McGregor has not yet been taken down. He hasn't faced a whole lot of attempts, but he hasn't yet been put on his back. So that will be the big unknown. Can Poirier get it down? If so, what happens when he gets there? We just don't know. We haven't seen enough of Conor McGregor on the mat to know how good that game is. He has been training with Gunnar Nelson. And, as you say, I think he's been working on this. But that is Poirier's only chance, I think, to finish this fight. I think otherwise McGregor is just going to pick him apart on the feet.
Now, the co-main event of the evening is a lightweight matchup between Donald Cerrone, who is 24-6 with 1 no contest, taking on the debuting Eddie Alvarez, who is 25-3. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
I opened Cerrone minus 130, the comeback on Alvarez minus 110, and right now looking over at the line at 5 dimes, it's exactly a pick on minus 110 each way. So line has tightened up, of course, and there's been a lot of action coming in on this fight, and it's weighed actually Alvarez was a favorite for a little while, and then, Cerrone's been bouncing kind of back and forth, so settling at a pick is probably the best possible spot, because it is an intriguing fight, and it's a great matchup. I mean, in a way, I want to say poor Eddie Alvarez. I mean, coming into your UFC debut, I know Brian and I were talking about it off here, and he reminded me that Alvarez was actually supposed to get an immediate title shot a while ago. So I understand that, and that's kind of why they're giving him a strong opponent in Cerrone. But I was thinking, man, what a tough spot to put Alvarez in making his UFC debut. I mean, from a matchmaker's perspective, I would probably try to give him maybe a competitive but easier fight than starting out with somebody like Cerrone, because Cerrone is a beast in several ways, as we all know, and not the easiest fighter to make your debut against. But Alvarez definitely game. I mean, I respect what he's accomplished outside of the UFC. He's definitely been one of the top lightweights in the world for a long time now. And it's his skill set. It's his desire to win. It's everything you want to see in a fighter Alvarez has. He has a ton of heart, and he's got the skill to go along with it. There has been some suspect spots though in Alvarez's game, and one of them being, I mean, his strike defense at times is a little bit scary. I mean, he has been tagged. He's been rocked quite a bit. But again, that's kind of where the heart comes into play, because you can rock Alvarez, but he seems to be hard to just get out of there. I mean, he's only been officially knocked out once in his career. And he has been rocked, like I said, several times, but he's managed to come back strong and end up winning most of those fights. So you have to give Eddie Alvarez credit for that. And as far as skill set goes, the guy's a tremendously well-rounded fighter. I mean, the guy has great overall stand-up skill, especially utilizing his boxing. I think he's very powerful and effective on the feet. Not just that, but I mean, he's capable of taking the fight to the floor if he wants against most opponents, controlling the tempo of the fight there. He's got a pretty good submission game. You can't sleep on that either. So Alvarez, again, deservingly getting his UFC shot. Of course, he's a former Bellator champion. We all know that too. So, that's obviously something solid to go on his resume as well. So fans have been looking forward to Eddie Alvarez making his UFC debut, and it's finally here. Now, that being said, let's get over to Cerrone. Man, Cerrone, you could say a lot of the same things about Cerrone as I just said about Alvarez. I mean, Cerrone's obviously a very well-rounded, talented fighter. His best attribute, in my opinion, is obviously the stand-up game. I mean, the guy is more than dangerous on the feet. He's got good hands, but his kicking game is pretty solid to go along with it as well. I think his wrestling offensively is pretty solid. Defensively, he does lack a little bit. I mean, he's hard to take down. He's not the easiest guy to control. He's got solid takedown defense, but he has been controlled in the past. I mean, look what RDA did to him. He was able to take him down, control that fight. That's kind of why he swayed the judges in that fight and got the W there, was because he was able to control more of that fight against Cerrone. And Cerrone, again, defensively, sometimes he has been tagged, he has been rocked a little bit, but he's managed to survive in those circumstances and, continue to finish off the fight. So again, a lot of similarities in these guys. But Cerrone, physical attribute-wise, he's going to have the height advantage over Alvarez. He's going to have a pure reach advantage, I believe, by 4 inches or so. And he's going to have, in my opinion, the stand-up edge over Alvarez. Again, both these guys defensively are flawed a little bit, so it wouldn't shock me if one of these guys knocks the other one out, because they're so talented offensively and they have enough knockout power to do so with the defensive flaws. But I still think you have to give the advantage more times than not to Cerrone. I think he's kind of the more devastating striker of the two. I think that with that little bit of a suspect chin, or, in the back of my mind, I think that Cerrone's the kind of guy, he's got the killer instinct, that he's a finisher. I mean, once Cerrone gets you in trouble, he knows how to close the deal. And that's where Alvarez could get in some trouble here. So if Cerrone can avoid being put on his back throughout this fight and his stand-up defense holds up, which I think he should be able to against a fighter like Alvarez, I think he matches up well enough where he should be able to keep the fight upright. And if so, he's going to have the stand-up edge, in my opinion. So with that being said, I think you have to lean a little bit more in Cerrone's favor. I think Cerrone can be the more effective striker in this spot. I think he can find a way to possibly finish Alvarez on the feet. If not, he can outpoint him on the feet as well. So my official pick and lean is going to be Donald Cerrone to beat Eddie Alvarez in his debut.
And I'm in agreement. I really think that Cerrone is in a pretty good spot here. Eddie Alvarez has been out for a significant amount of time, and Cerrone has been very active, and he's been taking on some pretty solid competition as of late. So you got to give him a little credit here. He's looked as good as he's ever looked in the cage, and he is not just winning, but he is finishing almost every single person put in front of him. So Donald Cerrone is in a great spot for this fight, in my opinion. Alvarez is going to be fighting under the bright lights of the UFC for the first time. And people really still aren't quite sure how he's going to match up against some of the best fighters in the UFC. Obviously, he's done more than enough against some of the best fighters outside the UFC. The most recent win over Chandler, a close fight, where he looked really good. So you got to give him some credit there. But for this fight on the feet, I really feel like Donald Cerrone's kicks are going to be a huge, huge factor. Alvarez is a very good technical boxer, uses great footwork and head movement. But what scares me is he gets clipped pretty often. I mean, he gets rocked in almost every single fight he's ever participated in, even fights where he was a heavy favorite. And I'm not quite sure that if he gets hurt against Cerrone, he'll be able to survive it. So that's very scary to me. And what Donald Cerrone does best is he usually uses his punches to set up his kicks. He will kind of move fighters in a direction and then just move them usually towards his right and then just fire off with the back right leg, whether it's with side kicks or front kicks or leg kicks, or most recently he's been very devastating with the head kicks. His last two knockouts have both been set up by the head kick, and it's been better than ever. His kickboxing game is very dangerous. He hurts you with knees, elbows, punches, kicks. Cerrone is just very dynamic on the feet. And Alvarez, he is more of a pure boxer. He does have good power in terms of his striking, and he definitely has a high volume attack, but it is a bit of a concern that his most dangerous attribute is probably where Cerrone will have an advantage. On the ground, I think Cerrone should have a submission edge, but Alvarez is very dangerous with his wrestling, and he does a very good job of being opportunistic and going for chokes. So if Cerrone somehow gives up his back, you got to be very scared for him, because Alvarez will jump on that and try to sink something in really quick. And Cerrone has been submitted before. Now, everything else, it's the one concern I do have is Cerrone has had a little bit of trouble in the past with some high volume boxers. Guys like Nate Diaz, lit him up, and he kind of had the deer in the headlights look. So Cerrone can be a little inconsistent against fighters that are similar a little bit to Alvarez, although Nate Diaz had a much longer reach and is even more high volume than Alvarez. So I don't think that'll be too much of a factor here. And honestly, I think that with everything else going against Alvarez, it's tough not to pick Cerrone. So I'm going to go with the Cowboy.
Now moving on to the main event of the evening, we have a flyweight championship bout between Demetrious Johnson, the current title holder, who is 22-1 overall, taking on Chris Cariaso, who is 17-5. Now, Nick, where did you open this fight, and how's the public shifted things so far?
My opening line, minus 14.25 for Demetrious Johnson, the comeback on Cariaso, plus 675. And again, since that time, basically the lines have been holding steady. It has tightened up a little bit. Right now we're seeing the line over at 5 dimes, minus 13.75, the comeback on Cariaso, plus 900. So DJ is still a huge favorite, and rightfully so. I mean, unfortunately for Cariaso, I do think that he's a better fighter than the current odds indicate, and I think we're going to probably see a fairly competitive match. But Cariaso is a very well-rounded fighter. He's got decent takedown defense. In most cases, especially since he's dropped down to 125, he's looked even better in that department. He's a capable grappler. He's got some submission skills, and on the feet, the guy packs a punch. He definitely has a little bit of power. He counters well with some decent intent, and his kicking game is probably the most impressive attribute on the feet for Cariaso. He can really mix things up well, especially with his kicks. So Cariaso's not a walk in the park, and in fact, I do think the line's a little bit high for this type of matchup. But that being said, Demetrious Johnson, the guy, pound for pound, is definitely one of the best fighters out there. He's so well-rounded, his skill set. He just keeps on improving his overall game. He's got the best wrestling, it seems. I know he's been put in some weird positions along the way against top caliber competition, but he still seems to have the quickest little shot, explosion, getting the fight to the floor, controlling things. His submission game seems to be legit as well. He's more than capable of subbing most guys. And his stand-up skill. Look what he did to Benavidez. A lot of people were kind of questioning Demetrious Johnson's power, and then he goes and knocks out a guy like Benavidez. So DJ is just an improving fighter. He's got the confidence. He's beat the who's who in his division so far. I mean, even in the 135 weight class, the guy was very successful in that weight class as well. So he's definitely a very skilled, talented fighter. And it's hard to imagine anybody right now in the flyweight division picking this guy off. So just matchup wise, I mean, Johnson is just going to be a step ahead of Cariaso in any aspect of the game. But I do think, again, Cariaso probably will be competitive and he will make things interesting. And it's going to be a better fight than most of us probably realize. But that being said, you got to look and see if Cariaso can steal some rounds along the way. And I don't think he can. Johnson's going to be a little bit faster. He's going to, I think, be able to outpoint Cariaso on the feet. And then if it gets to the championship rounds, I think that's where it gets a little bit interesting as well. I think Cariaso could probably hang 3 solid rounds with DJ. But round 4, round 5, Cariaso does have a tendency to slow down a little bit. And if that's the case, Johnson can step it up. He's had some late finishes in the past. So I wouldn't be totally shocked if we see a late finish by Demetrious Johnson in this fight again. But I'm going to give Cariaso the benefit of the doubt, and I expect him to probably lose by decision. But I hope I'm right, and I hope that he is game enough to at least make this a fight. But regardless of the fact, I just don't see a clear area where Cariaso can pull off the upset here. I think it's DJ's fight to win or lose. He could probably win every round in this fight. So that's why he's such a huge favorite, and I don't see an upset here.
Yeah, absolutely. Demetrious Johnson is the favorite for a reason. One of those reasons is his diversity. He is one of the better fighters in the UFC at timing takedowns, countering his opponent's aggression. So if Cariaso decides to be a little more active and push forward, Johnson's just going to shoot in and take him down. If Cariaso decides to stay back, Johnson can push the pace with his dynamic striking game, where he has excellent angles on the feet, and his movement is superb. He's going to be hands down the faster fighter in there. And if Cariaso wants to take this fight close and personal against the fence, Johnson showed in his last fight against Bagotinov that his clinch game is absolutely brutal. He was throwing a wide array of knees and elbows on the inside. So honestly, there's very few areas in this fight where Cariaso actually has an advantage. I would say one of them is the kicking game. Johnson really isn't known for throwing nasty kicks or anything. He doesn't chop down opponents with leg kicks. He doesn't really threaten with head kicks too often. And Cariaso actually does throw a lot of kicks at a high volume. He kind of uses them as a jab almost, where his opponents will get hurt from just blocking him. So I really do think that if Cariaso has a chance in this fight, it's going to come from his kicking game and his counter-striking game. And he needs to catch Johnson coming in repeatedly, which I'm not going to say is likely to happen just because Johnson is so quick. He's tough to get a beat on. And he's going to need to wear Johnson down with the kicks. Maybe eventually he could hurt him with them. He does like to throw them towards the head, so Johnson's going to have to repeatedly block them with his arms, and that could, do some damage there, even if they don't get through. But overall, Johnson is just going to be too fast, too athletic, too explosive, and too dangerous. And I can definitely see Johnson pulling out a late stoppage here as Cariaso starts to get worn down from just the repeated attacks, whether it's going to be takedowns or punches or clinch work with knees. So my pick is definitely going to be Demetrious Johnson. Now, Reed, what do the numbers tell us for this one?
Well, they're in agreement. I mean, on paper, actually, this is a lot closer than the odds would say. We saw recently a huge, extremely steep odds in a title fight with Dillashaw and Joe Soto. They tightened up a little bit just before fight time. So currently, Demetrious Johnson, if the lines hold, he would be the biggest title favorite in history for the UFC. It'll probably shrink a little bit, as they always do right before fight time. But needless to say, he is a huge, overwhelming favorite. And at least on paper, these guys are very similar. They both fought at bantamweight for a while and then moved down. So some of the metrics are a little bit skewed because they were fighting larger opponents earlier on. And Chris Cariaso actually comes in with, better pace and, better cage control. Now, Demetrious Johnson has slightly better defense and also better power. And I think that, in terms of the stand-up game, that will be the key to this fight. I think Cariaso likes to come forward. He's aggressive. And I think Johnson, he's going to stay out of trouble. He's very evasive, and he knows how to counter. That's exactly the game he used against Benavidez. He waited till Benavidez lunged forward against the cage and he caught him and he knocked him out. I think that will be a similar scenario. Now, it may take a while. I agree with you also that this could take a few rounds to develop. We're going to hit the championship rounds, and then Johnson's probably going to take over. His condition is going to be much better for the championship round, so you could look for a late finish as he's done a couple times. But just exchange to exchange, round to round, it's not a glaring mismatch, the way the odds suggest. So it probably means it's an unplayable fight for the fans. But you should expect Chris Cariaso to at least perform better than most people are giving him a chance to.
So that'll do it for our full event breakdown for UFC 178. Part 2 of the Premium Oddscast featuring our premium bets will be out Friday night around 8 or 9 p.m. Eastern Time. So stay tuned for that if you're an MMAOddsBreaker.com premium member. If we have a free play to give out, make sure to follow at Premium Oddscast or at MMAOB_premium on Twitter, because that's where we'll post them first. We can also notify you of our free bets via email if you prefer that method. Just send an email to picks@MMAOddsBreaker.com and we'll add you to our free bet mailing list. Also, feel free to like our Premium Oddscast Facebook page. We post articles, show announcements, and plenty of other information there so you can stay up to date on everything from us if you're interested. Special thanks to our sponsor, 5 Dimes. Good luck, everyone, and hopefully the betting gods are on your side this weekend.